Let me just start. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Good Governance Academy's event today. I see there are lots of people coming on board. Today, we're going to be talking about the C-Corp, which was recently launched in London. I'm just waiting for everybody to come online. I see we've got quite a few, but in the meantime, if you could just let us know where you're from. In the chat function, I'm just checking that the chat function is available. Yes, there it is. Pop it in the chat where you're from, and perhaps maybe what you're wanting to get out of. Hi, Gavin. What you're wanting to get out of today, and your thinking on conscious corporate leaders, really. I see Christopher, welcome. I'm just going to get us ready to live stream to YouTube. So if you give me a minute, I'm just going to do that. But in the meantime, welcome. And if you are wanting to pop a question to the panelists today, please put it in the Q&A so we don't get we don't get confused with the Q&A and the chat function. So I see we're 1 minute over, and I don't want to delay us any further. So I'd like to welcome Professor Mervyn King, as well as the co-founder of C-Corp, Brenda Kali. So I'd like to hand over now to Prof. King, just to maybe give us a background to why the C-Corp. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Carrie, and welcome to everybody. I want to take you back to the middle of the 19th century when the concept of forming a limited liability company was conceived. And it was conceived because wealthy families were balking against the idea of providing capital to businesses. And when the businesses failed because they were unincorporated, they were still liable to creditors and to employees. And it was a gentleman called Lord Gladstone in England, 2 senators in Massachusetts in the United States of America, who hit on the idea, well, why don't we create an artificial person that has limited liability so that you can participate by buying a share, and then you have no duty or responsibility to the company. And the concomitant for getting that protection was that if the business failed, you would be at the back of the queue from creditors and employees. Well, this was heavily opposed at that day by the church in England. And one famous clergyman, Lord Thurlow, in 1844, said the famous words, "Who are we to create a person? Only Almighty God can create a person. And we're creating a person that has no soul, no mind of its own, and no conscience. It has no body to be kicked, and for a wrongful act can't even be charged with treason." Lord Thurlow was correct, because when the company was created, it was an incapacitated person that had no mind, no soul, and no conscience of its own. Whether it was seen to be a responsible corporate citizen or not by the society in which it operated depended on the conduct and the mindset of the directors who gave life to the company, because a company, by definition, being incapacitated, cannot act on its own. It acts through its directors. And the directors were appointed mainly by the wealthy families who took a share of share certificates, which they subscribed for, and that money went into the coffers of the company. And then, of course, they sold their shares to secondary market shareholders, and that money went to the shareholder, didn't go into the coffers of the company. And therefore, the fascinating legal consequences of all that was that shareholders were never the owners of the company. And in any event, the company is in law and in fact a person. And 140 years ago, slavery was abolished. It's illegal to own a person. The attributes of ownership are that you can donate something, you can break it, you can throw it away, you can sell it. Well, no director can go into a company and remove its assets, it's a theft, because the assets belong to the company. So a shareholder hasn't got the attributes of ownership. And whether the company is seen to be a responsible corporate citizen or not depends on the conduct of its directors. And so years ago, Brenda and I discussed the question of the conscience of the directors, because if the directors don't act with conscience, by definition, the company is not going to be seen to be a responsible corporate citizen. But the concomitant of that was that, by definition, when something goes wrong, the company is innocent. Society turns against the company and sort of blackballs the company and doesn't buy the company's product anymore. But the company cannot, by definition, because it's incapacitated, commit a wrong. The wrong is committed through its directors. And if the directors aren't conscious directors in the sense of doing the right thing in the long-term best interest of the company and not in regard to a particular stakeholder, which was the mistake of the 20th century, that directors believed they should act in the best interest of the shareholders and increase the wealth of the shareholders. And profits increased, but they increased subsidized by society and the environment, leading to the extraordinary situation of ecological overshoot, which is the technical term for the fact that limited liability companies in the main, we as individuals to a less extent, by the turn into the 21st century, we knew that companies were using natural assets faster than nature was regenerating them. Now it takes a board of directors who are conscious people to do the right thing, to make sure that they take account of the critical ESG factors in the company and actually create this value creation instead of profit at any cost, because it was at any cost, according to Milton Friedman. You increase the profit, increase the share price, increase the dividends, and that was a successful company. Well, many of those profits, as I said, were subsidized by society and the environment. So the conscious director results in the company being seen to be a responsible corporate citizen, and you maintain the reputation of the company. So C-Corp stands for conscious corporation. And you're going to be a conscious corporation only if the directors are conscious directors. And I go back to Lord Thurlow, he was correct, that no body to be kicked and no soul to be damned. And it's correct that the company is an artificial person that has no soul and has no conscience. And that's why I've always said the company is always innocent, but its directors, if they're not conscious corporate leaders, then they must endure the wrath of society and not the company. So C-Corp is for conscious corporate leaders. So Brenda, as the founder, thinker of all this, over to you.
Thank you, Mervyn. Several years ago when you said to me, a company is inanimate until it is animated by its leaders and they become the heart, mind, and soul of the company. It really got me thinking, other than conscious companies being a scribble in a page in the middle of the night. This got me thinking that for leaders to become the heart, mind, and soul of any company, they have to be exemplars of resistance towards the need and greed in the business environment and get the ideology of consciousness itself that we carry in our very beings. And this is several conversations over the years with you. They also have to embrace conscious leadership and the essence that it is an inward journey into oneself and a different way of being in the world. So this leads to a transformation of their actions, behavior, impact that cascades down into the entire organization. So from that premise, the conscious companies movement was born, and the C-Corp, business powered by conscious leadership, accredited membership, is a consequence born out of dire need to create disruption and set into motion a stream of consciousness that would create a different quality of thinking and being in the world. So that leaders, both current and future, they have the tools to uplift and influence those whose lives they touch. Because in the midst of all of these challenges, there's a yearning for leaders to guide us back to our humanity. So a C-Corp accreditation is the gold standard for conscious ethical leadership based on the premise that a conscious leader shapes a conscious organization. And conscious leadership does matter. And as such, a leader can trigger a holistic vision that impacts on the behavior, the growth, the culture, the human capital, and work life of an organization. It's common when an organization strategy involves a company putting its best face forward through public relations, rebranding, corporate philanthropy, sustainability programs, and the espousal of high quality business practice, building itself a reputation for being far-sighted and responsible, even when it's not, like Steinhoff. But as long as the company is well managed, competent, and reasonably lucky, the strategy works. But if its actual core values and business practices and lack of conscious ethical leadership and governance, of course, do not match the image it presents to the world, it is taking a huge gamble, and it is sure to be exposed with enormous reputational risks. So the global network of accredited conscious leaders would have a collective voice, and this is one of the reasons why there was a vision to take conscious leadership into the world. And people get governance ethics, but when you talk about consciousness or conscious leadership to them, it somehow escapes them. And this global voice will be part of a globally integrated culture of conscious leadership. And then they would challenge the status quo of how business operates from a profit over purpose model while aligning shareholder value creation to stakeholder well-being, as well as have the necessary influence to impact humanity within their sphere. So this global network of being a leader of a C-Corp accredited company gives a breadth and depth to the organization's idea of itself, far more than any bottom line can achieve for its brand and its people. So what we're trying to say is that this does not mean that a company or its leader has to be perfect or flawless. None of us are perfect. So to be worthy of a C-Corp member, instead, any organization that has a conscious leader at its helm, and this is where we differentiate from other accreditations, where they have a conscious leadership at its helm, can embark on the journey towards a C-Corp accreditation. One of the criteria, among others, is that the leadership of the organization must gain the commitment of employees to fix broken business practices, unconscious ethical and untrustworthy practices that no longer reinforce the behavior and ethos of the C-Corp accredited organization. This would be a thread that binds the company together, where employees tap into their own unique potential and create a purpose and belongingness for the growth of the organization, and the company thrives. So this is the differentiator, and this could beat the competition regardless of industry conditions. You spoke about this earlier, Mervyn. What's the big trend at the moment? The next big thing is ESG. And this is also one of the key areas of evaluation when we do the accreditation. Well, in my opinion, and you might not agree with this, but let me clarify that ESG and ethics are segments that fall under the umbrella of conscious leadership. If we get that, then the compliance of these important segments fall away, and in its place, a conscious leader and his team sets the tone, so much so that ESG and ethics become part of the organization's DNA. It is then that compliance becomes conscience, and dependence on devices, tools, metrics, repetitive theories, reportage, although all of this has a place in the corporate machinery, gradually this becomes just conscious leadership in action and the willingness to do the right thing. And so leaders who are compelled to embrace ESG because it is the trend, or compliance, or greenwashing, or reputational enhancement, they should think again. Because in this era of technology and social media, working towards operating solely within the renewable energy, creating zero waste, and finally selling environmentally sustainable products as part of the company's DNA, as part of the company's conscious leadership, is really the hallmark of a conscious leader, driven to making a meaningful difference. I can cite any number of examples of leaders who are clueless about how not embracing conscious leadership can affect the reputation, brand, and the bottom line of the company. And let me tell you why. We live in a technocentric world where the buzzwords are Zoom, Teams, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, and other platforms. This is the new reality. A company does not have one spokesperson, they have millions. So your millions of spokespeople will wear your brand, shape their identity around your brand, or they will slander and destroy your brand. Millions of spokespeople will tell millions of consumers whether to trust your company or not, and whether you're a conscious ethical leader or not. People buy into a product, a service, a brand, an idea, a relationship, simply because they trust that you're a conscious leader and will shape the company accordingly and just do the right thing. I can also cite hundreds of stories of how conscious leaders generate such goodwill and save their companies, and some of them are C-Corp Accredited members, by not always looking at the bottom line, but by putting people first. These leaders, they instill a culture of belongingness, responsibility, and trust, and that makes all the difference. And the bottom line then takes care of itself. So a C-Corp accreditation means a leader operating in consciousness. It is a choice, and given the ethical and moral degradation around the world at this moment, it is a critical time to choose. Amazingly, most of us know the laws of nature, the mysteries of matter, and the power of the mind, but we are actually clueless about consciousness. Business schools churn out leaders, and leadership is about titles, positional power, flowcharts, process, and the bottom line. Conscious leadership is so much more than that. It is also about one life influencing another, about oneness, about humanity, about belonging, about trust and transparency, about care, compassion, kindness, and being where leaders see that the only source of power in their sphere of influence is the human being itself. This is the ethos of a C-Corp accredited company, where conscious leadership matters in this day of global uncertainty. And so there are various key evaluation areas before a leader embarks on a C-Corp accreditation, but it's mostly weighted if a leader is authentic, is purpose-driven, and he integrates all the interests of his stakeholders, and he's visionary and ethical. Those are the key areas of evaluation of a conscious leader.
All right, let me just add, Brenda, that it is quite extraordinary that some directors do not act in the best interests of the company.
Absolutely.
They selfishly sometimes take for themselves some business opportunity that they learn about in the company, and self-enrichment, for example, but fear to make a business judgment call that you may be sued by the company because it turns out to be wrong is also a corporate sin. And because part of your duty as a director is to take risk for reward. And the fear of it being wrong and one being sued by the company for damages was something that lawyers thought about some 60 years ago, because a person of great reputation and integrity in the community was appointed as a non-executive director of the company, and in good faith, part of the collective mind of the board made a business judgment call, which 4 years later turned out to be wrong and harmful to the company. And theoretically and in reality, the company could sue the directors for damages for making the wrong business judgment call. Now, this was seen to be absolutely inequitable. When a person of great reputation and skills, he or she had a successful professional career, had unblemished reputation, and had honestly applied their minds to this matter, but turned out to be the wrong business judgment call. Now, I speak from experience. I have been a director and chairman of companies in Europe, in London, and Southern Africa, and I'm covered in corporate scars because I, like any director, from time to time you make the wrong business judgment call. It's not possible to get unknown future events right 10 out of 10. And this was realized some 60 years ago, and so the business judgment rule was developed. And the business judgment rule has got 3 criteria. 1, you had no monetary interest in that decision. 2, objectively speaking, you had all the facts on which you made the decision. 3, at the time, it was a rational business decision in those circumstances, not the correct business decision, a rational business decision at that time in those circumstances. And that is a guide for the conscious corporate leader, that he makes sure he makes a rational business judgment call in the long-term best interest of the health of the company, not any particular stakeholder. Because if the collective mind of the board gets that right, it's in the long-term best interest of all the stakeholders in the company. And I've often said to directors, when something goes wrong, if you were the guardian of a 5-year-old child who had become mindless, injured in a motor car accident, unfortunately, would you have done ABC? And the answer is always no. I said, why did you do XYZ to this company? It's an incapacitated person that's solely dependent on you, the same as if you were the guardian of a mindless 5-year-old child. And you need to apply your mind and cross what I call the intellectually honest Rubicon. You need to cross that, put aside past experiences and present needs with a clear mind, listen to the inputs of your colleagues, and then make a business judgment call in the long-term best interest of the company. And I make this point because there's an argument that goes around the world today. What is the audience to which we as directors report? And a lot of people say that, well, the financial report and the integrated report, the audience are the providers of financial capital. Well, the law is quite clear that directors have a duty of accountability to the company. And how do they discharge that duty? It's through corporate reporting. And if your corporate reporting is not substance over form and is not correct, then I'm afraid you're not discharging your duty of accountability. But audience has become a red herring, because to say, well, your audience, when you are doing an integrated report or whichever report you're doing, to discharge your duty of accountability, are the providers of capital. Your audience is always the company, because if you gave me 100,000 Rand to invest for you, Brenda, I would owe you the duty of care, and I'd have to be accountable to you. Exactly the same when you are appointed a director. You have that duty to act with conscience and make sure that you make a business judgment call which is the best long-term interest of the health of the company. And that's why 3 years ago, in my travels around the world, companies consulting with me and lecturing at universities and business schools around the world, I realized that from an educative point of view, not every business school and university was teaching accountancy and legal principles in the same manner. I mean, they're still sort of treating and teaching in silos, and we're focusing on profit as the successful motive, instead of focusing on value creation for society. Because if you, through the company, and don't forget it was society that created the incapacitated company, because it was created by the government, the representative of society. It was created by society for society. And the directors, therefore, have to act in good conscience in the best long-term interest of the health of the company. And if you get that right, it's in the long-term best interest of the stakeholders. From time to time, you might benefit one stakeholder over another, but then the next time you make that business judgment call honestly in the best long-term interest of the health of the company. The law now protects you because it was a rational business decision at that time in those circumstances. Even if it turns out to be incorrect and harmful to the company, you escape liability. But the critical issue, and I'm delighted to say, Brenda, that at universities around the world, and my university, Wits University, has now got a postgraduate diploma in thinking about these things, value creation for society and integrated thinking. And the Department of Higher Education in South Africa has recognized it as a postgraduate diploma. So, yeah.
Can I ask you a question? Why are we then in such a hot mess? Because for a leader to operate with conscience, he has to understand and embrace consciousness. And that's the disconnect, that's the gap that we are battling with. And that's the gap that needs to be embraced by business schools and leadership.
And that's what's got to be taught.
Yes, and several years ago, I engaged with you and I said, South Africa is a home to King, and you're the father of King 4. Yet why is it in such a mess? And it's because the leaders don't understand what consciousness is. So governance and ethics is one side of the coin, and consciousness and conscious leadership is on the other. And if people can see, or leaders can see both of it, then at least there would be some kind of movement and the challenge of how the status quo of how business operates at the moment. And at the moment, globally, we're really in dire straits.
Well, I think the bottom line of the launch of the C-Corp is that directors have to realize that they are the conscience of the company.
Absolutely.
And they must act correctly, do the right thing, which is to make decisions in the long-term best interest of the company, and put aside all their self-interest and fears, and whatever, arrogance sometimes as well, I think is a corporate sin. When you think you're doing the right thing and your competitor's doing the wrong thing, and you don't even apply your mind to, why they're doing it. And so these are things but conscious corporate leadership is absolutely critical for the future of the limited liability company. And that's why I think the Good Governance Academy has linked SDG 4, which is quality education, with SDG 17, collaboration. And we now are colloquia, and we're having one on Thursday on the question of inputs, impacts, and integration. 3 words that, whatever they meant to you years ago, today have a different meaning to you because of the change from thinking of the primacy of the shareholder to this value creation process. So I want to just end in saying the question of consciousness and being conscious corporate leader is something that needs to be realized by the director who's appointed and should be taught at business schools and universities as part of the curriculum. And I'm delighted to say is being taught now around the world in several universities and business schools.
So most leaders look outwardly in terms of applying these principles, but consciousness and embracing conscious leadership is an inward journey, and there's a special, and they haven't embraced that yet, not the business schools. They haven't embraced that inward journey because corporate transformation cannot happen without personal transformation. And most corporates engage with culture revitalization strategies, policies, without looking at the human being and the individual. And it is about the human being. As you said, a company is inanimate. It's desks, chairs, buildings, offices, but it's people who animate and populate those spaces that should be conscious. And it really would make an enormous difference if leaders actually get it.
Agreed. Right. Are there any questions anybody online would like to ask?
Just having a look at the chats, we don't have anything yet, but I think a question from my side is we've got different legislation around the world, and some jurisdictions don't have the personal liability from a director's perspective. And I know that that is a big driver, the personal liability side of things, just the approach to compliance. So many directors are wanting to tick the box, and the personal liability basically drives that box ticking. But I know that other countries don't have that kind of drive. Is the conscious corporate leaders, do you see that us getting some kind of that there's less insight into being a conscious corporate leader when there isn't that compliance drive to personal liability?
Well, Kerry, there's got to be a realization by directors that they have to be conscious corporate leaders, that the company is an incapacitated person and has no conscience and has no mind. And they are the conscience and mind of the company. So the question of liability, their liabilities to the company. Now, a lot of people think, and some lawyers believe, that actually their liabilities to the shareholders. So we saw in South Africa two famous cases, Steinhoff and African Bank, where shareholders actually sued the directors because the companies had collapsed and they had lost money in the form of their shares dropping in value from, I don't know, 99%. But the court correctly held that the correct plaintiff is the company and not the shareholder. And so the question is, who is the correct plaintiff when there is a wrong committed? And it is never one of the stakeholders, unless there was a direct misrepresentation to a particular stakeholder by directors. It is the company that has the right to claim damages for any wrong committed. So a lot of countries have tried to achieve all this by way of legislation. Now, you can legislate till you're blue in the face, but if someone goes rogue, legislation doesn't help.
Absolutely.
And I think South Africa, we've learned a good lesson in the Public Finance Management Act. We've gone through a painful, corrupt 10 years, and where various state institutions were captured. And Thuli Madonsela issued a report when she was the public protector, the state of capture. Not state capture, the state of capture, because institutions were captured. And and they were captured by people who didn't belong to the state. So it wasn't state capture, but it was individuals who captured by political leaders permitting the wrong people to become, for example, directors of state-owned companies who had no conscience, who in fact were there to pluck the opportunities of the company for their own benefit. So the question of liability, Kerry, is something that's like a sword of Damocles over the shareholder's head. but a director's head. But if the director actually is acting with intellectual honesty and in making a rational business decision in the best long-term interest of the company, he knows he has the protection of the law. And but it's got to be done with an honest mindset and in the long-term best interest of the health of the company, this incapacitated person for which you are the mind and the conscience. And that's why being a conscious corporate leader is so important. And that's why you and I have got involved in linking quality education with collaboration. And so Carrie has achieved, in the last 3 years, we've achieved through the Good Governance Academy, we have critical business science issues. And on Thursday, the Good Governance Academy has another colloquium in which we're discussing inputs, impacts, and integration. And we have the best speakers around the world on these subjects. And we have our members like the American Institute of Certified Public Accountants, ICAAW, England, Wales, IRD UK, IRD India, etc., etc. And through them, their members get a summation of what has happened at these colloquia. And the last colloquium, our summation, Carrie, went to 5 million accountants and directors in 135 countries. So we're starting through the GGA to actually educate people about becoming conscious corporate leaders, by teaching them the importance of all these issues.
So here's the question, Mervyn, and to the audience. What does consciousness mean to you? My mantra is conscious leaders shape conscious companies. And so if you actually go and ask yourself that question, what does consciousness mean to you? Then it kind of would open up a doorway and it would initiate your engagement with conscious leadership. In February of this year, we're doing a CEO retreat where I'm taking a group of leaders and executives to India to do a mind, body, spirit detox in a 3-day conscious leadership program. And I assure you, they'll never be the same again when they come back to their companies. This is proven that when leaders engage with themselves and through various methodologies, there is a shift. And the shift can only happen through their own consciousness. And I'm still threatening to take you, Mervyn, to India.
Yes, you're still trying to get me to India.
I see there's a question here. It says, is the C-Corp accreditation only or initially focused on large or larger corporates? As one has,
Every corporate, every company that has a conscious leader or thinks that the leader is conscious. And so we go through an evaluation vetting process. And that's how the accreditation takes place. Who has a conscious leader or semi-accreditation process.
Can you give us a little bit more information about that accreditation process? What does that entail?
Okay, so it's on our website. There's an initial, so we launched it in the UK in September, and it's a joint venture with Empowered, which is the Mohanji's team. Now, Mohanji is a humanitarian and a philanthropist, and his team and the Conscious Leadership and Business Institute, which is ours, is a joint venture, and he has a presence in 90 countries. So immediately after that joint venture, we have a presence in 90 countries. But there's a whole criteria and evaluation process that takes place, but it's weighted on the leader. So 40% of that evaluation is on the conscious leader. And that's a personal journey in terms of the transformation of the leader. And then there is the governance and ethics and culture and sustainability, both financial and environmental. There's purpose and innovation, there's value creation, and there's service. These are the key areas of evaluation that we do. But the initial step to embark on the accreditation processes, go into our website, you'll find a form there that you could fill out, and then we will engage with you.
To add to that chat that came up on screen, that conscious leadership is about creating value for society.
Conscious leadership is more than creating value for society. It's also about influence. It's about creating a global network or coming back to our humanity. That's what it is about. It's about treating every human being as somebody, because we're all made of the same stuff. We're all made of the same stuff as the sun, moon, and the stars. And yet we are so divisive. We are disparate. There's competition. This world is in such a critical state at the moment. But if we only get back to who we are supposed to be kind and noble and compassionate. And that seems to be missing. And in the business speak, in the boardroom, if you mention love, they look at you like you come from a different planet. Initially, when I mentioned consciousness to CEOs, they looked at me like, where does this woman come from? So fortunately, we've proven that it works, and leaders have transformed, and those who have won the Conscious Companies Award have come and changed their companies. So over the years, there's a credibility and a trajectory there that people are thinking there has to be a different way of being in the world. There has to be a different way of doing things. And this really, the C-Corp is, as I said earlier, it's a disruption. It's to force leaders to challenge how they do business and challenge the status quo of how business operates.
I just want to make the point for everybody online that this is not a fad just about being a conscious person. I mean, the company still has to be profitable, but it's how you make that company profitable. If you act in a conscious manner, and as I said, if you actually add value to society, instead of the bottom line being subsidized by society and the environment, which it was throughout the 20th century, then you can put your head on the pillow at night and go to sleep peacefully. But if you're not creating that value for society, for example, if you have a business model which is adding to the degradation of planet Earth, well, then if you're making a profit, you actually not making a profit, because there's no value being added to society. You're subtracting from society and subtracting from those that come after us. So the conscious corporate leader would never do something, for example, build a new factory on a river so that he or she is close to a river to dump the waste in the river. Would never do that today. And yet through the 20th century, it was the criteria for success was profit, increased dividends, increased share price, even though the bulk of those profits were subsidized by society and the environment. The conscious corporate leader makes sure that there's not an adverse impact on people and society, so and the environment. It is an important subject, and as I said, Brenda, I'm delighted that there are several universities and business schools that now have embraced this and are teaching it. Well, I know my university is teaching it. There's a great university in France that's doing it, one in the UK, so it does, and Australia.
Thanks, Mervyn.
So it's happening.
So eventually we'll get to a space when you talk about consciousness or conscious leadership, people won't roll their eyes, they'll absolutely get it.
So the other word that's kind of out there is when you speak about the spirit of the board and the spirit in which you make decisions. So Brenda, a question to you is, do you find, so you've got the rolling of the eyes with the conscious leadership, but do you find the words that, the spirit within which you do things, or the spirit of the board comes through, the spirituality of governance, does that come through at all, or are we still not getting there?
Not at all. we still have to get with the program, because some words, as I said earlier, like love and compassion and care and kindness and spirituality, if you mention it in the boardroom, because it's hardcore, the other board members who don't get this at all look at you and think, this doesn't belong here in the boardroom. But it very much belongs there, because if the mindset changes, then we can do things differently. And all I'm advocating is, let's have a different way of being in the world. And that different way of being in the world is to understand your consciousness, to understand the ideology of consciousness itself, and to embark on that journey. It's an inward journey. You are responsible for yourself. And trust me, one never would operate or do things the same. I only wish our leadership, the political leadership here, could engage with conscious leadership. We'll have a very different government. But you know, when someone asks you, I don't know what you're selling, I don't know what you're talking about, then it shows the level of understanding in terms of consciousness.
I've asked Gavin to come and ask his question, because it's quite a lengthy one. He hasn't come on yet, but I will start in the meantime. Gavin asked, he said, the final physical design characteristic to consider is how the meeting space is used dynamically as a way of improving meeting function. One general principle is to ensure that the space is as flexible as possible, so that it increases participants' feelings of control and enables changes to suit the board's meetings' different gears of monitoring, mentoring, strategizing, decision-making. There's nothing stopping a board meeting moving away from a formal table environment to another particular space arrangement at a certain point in the meeting. For example, breaking into smaller groups to sit around with no tables may be useful to encourage discussion, or standing up around a whiteboard may be chosen to increase creativity. This is interesting, because we don't normally do this. Although this might seem radical, we know that standing up meetings are 34% shorter than sitting down meetings, but we have no measurable decision quality differences. In addition, there is a relational benefit of having no tables, as this reduces the psychological distance that people and okay, he's going on to the next one. Okay, it's not a so he carries on that. But from your perspective, Brenda, and maybe even Prof. King, in terms of boards, we generally see when you look for images of board meetings and boardrooms, it's staid, it's corporate, there are chairs around, but we don't see the, we can imagine the conversations going across the table, and we don't see this kind of creativity coming into boardrooms. Is it going to be an enabler or a detractor, do you think, from conscious leadership in a boardroom?
The answer to that question is that when a board makes a decision, it's a collective mind decision. But there are individuals making up this collective mind. And it's very important that the board goes offline and stand around, have a braai, a barbecue, do what you like, go offline and discuss to make sure that you have a unified collective mind, not a fragmented one, so that you have common understanding of the purpose of the business. So in a fireside chat with the chairman of Shell, I think, Kerry, you facilitated that. I can't remember. Yes, you did.
Yes, yes.
I mean, the question of transitioning, Shell's purpose is to be the major provider of energy, but in a sustainable manner. Now, you cannot do that overnight, because Shell can't turn off their oil rigs overnight for a very good reason. That one of the main shares held by pension funds around the world is Shell. And Shell has given consistent dividends for years to those pension funds. Those pension funds themselves have invested into IPOs of other businesses. So you've got to transition out of that to move away from the oil to renewables. But it's going to take 10, 15 years for Shell to actually change. So when you go offline, you think about the purpose of the company, agree the purpose of the company, because that's going to affect your decision. You agree the characteristics of the company. because what outside stakeholders see of the company is characters, it's characteristics. So I'm a South African, I've got a South African culture, but I've got characteristics. The same thing with the company. You must agree the KPIs, the key performance indicators, the key risk indicators. You must agree the value drivers of the company, such as FedEx when they started. They believed the main value driver was reliability. If you're not reliable in delivering parcels and documents, well, you're not going to have a very successful business. So they asked themselves when making a decision, right down to the tea lady, it was asked, is this going to be reliable? Is it going to be seen to be reliable? And that became the mantra inside the company. So you need to go offline and have the kind of discussion that the person in the chat is asking, that you need to, but you need to think of these things. What are the value drivers? What is the purpose of the company? What are the key performance indicators, key risk indicators? What are the characteristics? What is the culture of the company? Now, the culture of the company is, I believe, the American definition is still the best, how we do things around here when no one's watching us. So you'll see it's a very internal thing. But the characteristics of a company is what the outside stakeholders see of the company. And you should make sure that that collective mind, when it's sitting around the boardroom table, doesn't make a decision which is inconsistent with those characteristics, because then the minds of your stakeholders start changing. So what the question is asking is, I think, something that should happen offline or outside the company. And you have to agree those things to make sure that when you make that business judgment call, it's a unified collective mind. It's not fragmented. So I'm thinking of one characteristic, you thinking of another. It's absolutely unified. And one of the chairman's critical roles is to bring people back to say, what about this key performance indicator? How does it impact on that? And then to go back to the 3 criteria for the business judgment rule. And the critical one is, would this be seen to be a rational business decision in the years to come? Let's just think about it. Let's apply our minds to it. So he's absolutely right. Have that kind of discussion, but I say offline. And then you sit to get that collective mind decision.
Thank you, Prof. King. And from your side, Brenda?
So just to talk about Shell. On the one hand, they want to, their purpose is business, but on the other, they do the fracking. So there's a disconnect there already.
And a conscious leader maybe pick that up. We've got an interesting webinar coming up on the 15th of November, and so in 2 weeks' time, talking about the transforming experiences in the boardroom. And this is a chap who has previously a company secretary, chartered secretary, who has found that using innovative techniques in the boardroom can solicit some different responses, and certainly remembering what the decisions were. But again, to your point, Brenda, if you are a conscious leader, you would be conscious in that boardroom and consciously engaged, and that would surely help your memory of specific decisions that are made over time. But what would you say, Brenda, what are the benefits of that conscious leadership in terms of the operations or the practicalities of being a director in your personal capacity?
Yeah, first of all, it gives you a lead in terms of your creativity, because if you understand who you are as a human being, and you understand that doing the right thing is not some ticking the box, but it's something that's automatic, then as a director or a CEO of an organization, you bring your whole self into a company. Most people, when they work in the corporate space, they divide themselves. They forget that they're fathers, mothers, sons, brothers. They come in, and it's okay to stand on the shoulders of others. It's okay to be ambitious, and so for their ambition, it's okay to absolutely do whatever they need to do unconsciously. But if you have that DNA of being a conscious leader, you always do the right thing. You might not be perfect, you lose your temper, or you'll have an ethical dilemma, but you'd always attempt to do the right thing. And that's why in a boardroom, if the directors get what consciousness is, rather than just looking at the bottom line or looking at shareholder value creation, then it's another way of operating in business. And this is what, to break through that barrier is look, I'm on a board, and I must tell you, it's a conscious company, but not all of them get what consciousness is about. So it needs education, it needs a movement, it needs a different narrative in the business space.
Thanks, Brenda. There is a question here from Sullivan. Is there a standard that can be used to objectively measure conscious leadership? And can a comparative analysis be made between companies big and small? And I think that is what C-Corp is all about, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely.
I think so, Carrie, but the question of being a conscious corporate leader follows like night follows day. When you think back to the middle of the 19th century, when there were no duties of directors had been legally formulated yet, but the development of being a guardian of an incapacitated individual was well developed by towards the end of the 19th century, and that was to act in their best interest, to take care, and whatever skills you have to pass over to them, and be diligent and understand their position and plan short, medium, and long term for them. And those became the duties of directors. Why? Because the common denominator was incapacity. That's why. That's how it developed. And when you think about that, consciousness is one of those things that you needed as a good guardian of an individual, of a human being who had become mindless for some reason or another, and a court appointed you as the guardian of that person for the rest of his or her life. And that law was developed by the 19th century turning into the 20th century, and became the criteria for a director to act in good faith, with care, skill, and diligence. So it's being a guardian, a good steward of the company, of this incapacitated person that has no mind, no conscience of its own. As I said in a broadcast I did in the Australian Broadcasting Corporation, the company is always innocent, never commits a wrong. By definition, it cannot. And when something goes wrong, the Rothschild Society must turn against those leaders, and those leaders need to change. But you can't make the company can disappear, but wind it up. But the company will still be there, but you need to change those leaders to change that the company is not being seen to be a responsible corporate citizen. Because if it's not in today with social media, you're going to lose your customer base. You're going to lose your reputation. And once a company loses its reputation, well, then it loses wealth, because one of its currencies is its shares. They can issue more shares, and with those shares acquire a competitor, for example. But the currency, the price of that currency just drops when the reputation drops. And if you haven't got a conscious corporate leader, or you haven't got conscious corporate directors, well, then your value of your company is going to drop.
Yes. And even in fund scenarios, when you've got like a medical fund or a pension fund, when you have member appointed directors, there has to be that consciousness to be able to effectively lead. But I see we're running out of time. And first of all, I must apologize. The live stream to YouTube didn't work. So I'm going to be loading up the Zoom recording to YouTube and to the website for people to access. But I do see we've got 2 or 3 online. So apologies to those who were waiting for the YouTube to live stream. But we've got 1 minute left, and I'd like Brenda to give us a last comment in terms of what message do you want to leave us with so that we go away doing something?
So the message I would like to leave is to ask the question again: what does consciousness mean to you? Because, as human beings, we are all conscious, but it depends on what you're conscious about, whether you're conscious about creating wealth, sex, money, drugs, accumulation. What are you conscious about? Ask yourself that question. And what the differentiator is between a conscious leader that we embrace is that they have to grasp an alternate reality. And what do I mean by an alternate reality? I'm not talking about any of those plant medicines or bread. I'm talking about a leader who understands the ideology of consciousness that we carry in our beings and the essence that we are and have a purpose on this planet. So my final question is, what legacy would you like to leave? Would you like to leave a legacy of greed, or would you like to leave a legacy of positivity and uplifting and enhancing and influencing those who have come into your sphere?
Thank you very much, Brenda. And thank you, Prof. King, for this fireside chat. It really has been wonderful. And I hope that many, many directors and organizational leaders actually watch this video and take cognizance of what you've been saying. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Karen. Thank you, Brenda.
Thank you, Karen.